Welcome to the Rose Hour podcast. I'm your host, Renee J. Johnson, and we're so thankful that you decided to join us today. We have two awesome guests, Waikinya Clanton, Democratic strategist, and Kevin Rapp, owner of Rapp Imports Wine.
Everybody drink rose, rose.
So we sipping rose.
We gonna sip rose, rose.
Sipping rose.
Baby girl, she don't play.
So we sipping rose.
We're gonna sip rose.
That rose hour, baby. Sipping rose.
Everything will be
Hey,
okay.
Ben. Welcome. It's great to have such an amazing bartender here.
What up?
So, hey, everybody. We want to thank you again for listening. And Ben has decided to serve us a new rosé today. So, what's the name of the rosé we're drinking?
Yes Way Rosé.
Oh, so what do you think of it so far?
I'm not quite a fan.
Really? Why not?
It has a bitter aftertaste. I'm not really into it.
Well, it's a crisp, effervescent brut rosé, and it's supposed to be a celebratory rosé. You don't feel like we're celebrating?
We always celebrate. It's the first episode of the gate. So I think we're doing a good thing.
Well, this rosé is like a pink ganache sparkler. It's from the south of France. It's supposed to have like wildflowers, apricot, pink grapefruit zest, and some refined, long-lasting bubbles. How does that
I'm
feel?
pretty sure all of that stuff is in it.
Really?
It tastes like all of that is in the wine.
Well, since you're the bartender, Ben, I want to know what your 2020 goals are.
To make more money, to be more healthier, to be more better.
Mo.
Big mo.
Well, that's good because today I'm excited that we're having a great guest. And I am excited the conversation we had with Waikinya because she talks about how people can get into the advocacy world, how they can actually do more towards the elections, and also sip hooray for rosé because she talks about her favorite kind.
Right. The homie. Let's go ahead and hop into that.
All right, let's get into the first interview with Miss Waikinya Clanton. Hey there, friends. It's Renee from the Rose Hour podcast. I'm here to tell you about Anchor. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. How dope is that? Anchor will distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many, many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started today. Yay. I'm here with one of my near, dear, great, amazing, fantastic, just scrumptious friends, Waikinya Clanton.
Renee, you are far too kind. I'm excited about this. I'm super happy to be your first guest on the show.
Yay!
Huge congratulations to you. I mean, I know this is going to go far beyond your wildest dreams, and we are all here root for you. So let's go, girl. What we got to do?
Yes. Well, thank you for that, and thank you for being our first guest.
You're welcome.
And being our first guest, I feel like people want to know, like, how do we know each other? The cliche thing in the world, right? Like, everybody's like, how do you know so-and-so? So instead of me telling the story, because it's not really a story, because there's some people who are meant to be in life, and you're meant to be in my life.
Yes.
So why don't you tell people how you are meant to be in my life?
Well, Renee, you are so DC in the sense that you're absolutely right. We should tell people how we know each other. I think like most folks in this city who aren't native to the city, we all come here as transplants.
Right.
And the beautiful thing about being came from other places, you get to bring that spirit with you.
Yes.
When you migrate in. And so I think our journey together actually started on the Hill for the most part, being affiliated with groups like Congressional Black Associates and the Senate Black Staff Associations that always puts good Black people together.
That's right.
The Hill is such its own community, but it's also so small. And I think the Black staff within that community all tend to gravitate towards one another just for solidarity in most instances, but also just continuity and also the spirit of just being able to be yourself with folks. Right. And so I think we first encountered each other on the Hill, but then our friendship developed over just mutual friends and being able to be in the same spaces and, two amazing people from different parts of the world, but I like to say from the same place because you're from Illinois, and that's kind of north,
basically
North Mississippi. So same thing. Yeah. Worlds merge. For real, you're my play cousin, but in real life. But
yes. You guys now know the cat's out the bag. I'm officially her play cousin.
For real,
you guys did not know from North Mississippi.
From North Mississippi, by way of Chicago.
Right. Are things you are working on in the industry that you're in that you think we all should know? And please take a sip. I know people at home take a sip as well because it's about to get deep because we talk about 2020.
Yeah, it depends on which industry you want to know about. Do you want to know about the fashion industry, the political industry, which industry? No. In all seriousness, I would like to say for 9 to 5, I dedicate my life to serving others, but I think I dedicate my life to serving others around the clock, even when it supersedes 24 hours in a day from some type of way. Black women make days go longer and longer than they're supposed to.
Months and years.
But, in the political world, I think it's no secret to everybody what we're dealing with. We're watching it play out in real time on national television. We see just this overt abuse of power happening in our country, which is really not only threatening but undermining our democracy. And I think that's really and truly the scariest part about where we are right now as a country. But greater than that, the thing that worries me the most outside of this president is people's response to it. Yeah. And the fact that we are becoming numb to it. That is the scariest part to me. It's
very scary.
And it's not just, Democrats or Republicans or independent. It's the world is becoming numb to this. And we are normalizing this type of inaction or direct disrespect for action, and it is, to me, highly alarming. And so the one thing that I'm really working towards is keeping folks focused on the issues, making sure that people know what's at stake far beyond who's in office, which is not an easy thing to do. It's not a sexy thing to do, but it's an imperative thing to do. Yeah. And as the months go on, you'll start seeing more conversations coming from candidates trying to make the case and make the sale. But the one thing that I'm encouraging folks to do is really focus on what people need right now. I think the days of waiting for promises of the future are done. Yeah. People are looking for instant results. They want to know when, where, what time, who gonna be there, how long it's gonna take.
The quintessential, who all gonna be there?
Who all gonna be there and what y'all gonna do when you get there. That's what people are really waiting on right now. And they're looking to our elected leaders for a lot of direction. But I think over the last couple of months, what I have found to be the most assuring in a lot of the chaos that's been happening is that a lot of people are taking it upon themselves to kind of be the validators, to be the movers and the shakers, and to galvanize their communities. And that, I think, keeps me going in the work that we've been doing. But even far beyond that, I would just say, I want to just caution folks to keep your heads up and keep your grind going, because you're going to need it. We're going to need all this energy, and we're going to need folks to start. Don't look at the person, look at the policy, right? Look at what the potential is for them to do something great and amazing with the support of folks on the ground, and realizing what your power is and how that supersedes just voting for a person. But there's an accountability that needs to be assigned to the people who you entrust with the responsibility to lead. And I think that's what I'm looking forward to in this upcoming election cycle.
Yes. Yes. And I think you brought out a really good point that I think many people do not do. They don't look at the person, or rather they look at the person and not the policy, right? They think like, oh, well, this person is shiny and I like this shiny thing. It's attractive. It sounds like it makes sense to me, but it's like everything that it stands for policy-wise, it's against you. It is trying to tear you down. What are some things you think that people can try to do to get away from sort of the fake news, shiny people situations and actually looking at policy? Like, what are some policies you think people can just like off GP be like, okay, that's one that I need to question.
Easy thing, right?
Yeah.
Well, what you've just described is what I like to call the chandelier effect, right? Like everybody looks at the person. It's like this beautiful, shiny.
It's hanging out there in the ceiling.
It's defying gravity, and it's just, again, it is breathtaking to look at. But then you got to figure out, well, what's the function of it, right? And like, what's actually causing it to illuminate? What's actually causing it to grab your attention? Is something under there, right? It's the light. It's what I call the light bulb.
Right.
And that light bulb is generally a group of people who are assigned with the responsibility to craft policy. And so when you're looking at a candidate, also look at their team. That's why during election cycles, you see all of these stories come out about who's on whose team and like, you know, and I think some people think about, oh, it's just about race, it's just about gender. No, actually, it's about who's going to be crafting policy, who's going to be setting agendas and coming up with strategy and tactics, and who's going to be directing this candidate who says they have the vision, but they need someone who's going to implement it in place. And so when you have when you start looking at candidates, go a little bit deeper. Look at their records, of course, if they have them, but more so than that, look at the people around them.
Right.
You know, you can always tell about a person who they based off who they surround themselves with. If they're going to be able to be, or if they're going to be accessible to you. Most people vote for you for 3 reasons: they need you, they know you, they like you, right? And determining whether or not that need is there, and whether or not you're likable, and being able to convert all that into a voter, into the psychology of a voter, is a very complicated thing. And so you need people around you who are helping shape and steer policy along the lines of the things that people need in their communities. And so from a policy standpoint, of course, for most people in America, healthcare is still number one. Right? You have over 30 million people who for the first time in a long time actually had access to healthcare under the Obama administration, right? We see
shout out to Obama on that.
Shout out to 44 in the squad. But
Illinois leads, right, of course.
But more so than that, and also his wife Michelle, because it was because of Michelle. But, you know, I digress. But on a greater note of that, healthcare is still number one for a lot of people, but for a lot of people, it's still number one. But for a growing, emerging base of people, it is the economy. Yeah. Folks want to be able to afford things for themselves. They want to be able to build and actually live and realize the American dream. And they can't do that by constantly relying on the system to give to them something that they should have been given. They should be able to afford on their own. And so it's not to say that the government doesn't have a role to play and that we shouldn't be making, putting good policy forth to ensure for people who can't. Like, not everybody's going to be an entrepreneur, right? Not everyone's going to be able to go get a 6-figure job. But people should have the option and they should have the ability
to do so.
Exactly. We have to start focusing on growth in this country and what it looks like. We have to start focusing on infrastructure and investment and creating opportunities for folks, whether it's to work or to employ people to work. As a country, as the greatest country in on this earth, we have a responsibility to our citizens, and that looks like creating opportunities where people can be self-sufficient.
I agree with that. And it's so amazing, too, like the correlation between healthcare and the economy, right? Because there are people who are like, oh, I only care about my healthcare. And there's people who are like, only care about the economy. But the intersectionality between the two is like, well, you can't afford your prescription drugs. That's because of an economy issue as well as a prescription drug pricing issue, which is a healthcare issue. So they intersect so much. And I think people are like, I have like this one highlighted issue and it's this one issue. But it's like, no, your issue intersects so many other problems that you have. And you don't even realize it, because if you fix that one thing, you still be a person who has all these other problems.
Other issues. You're absolutely right. I mean, economic injustice and injustice across the board. Injustice across the board. And I think when you mentioned something that I really want to uplift here. You mentioned prescription drug costs. And we don't talk enough about the impacts of prescription drug costs on our aging communities. Like, our seniors are in a position where they're making choices between food and pills. Yeah. Those are people who've already worked and come through a system, and now they're in retirement or they're on Social Security and they're not being able to make their ends meet, and we are failing them as a nation. Irrespective of party, as a nation, we have given up and we have tossed aside our seniors, and we have a cost to pay for that. And so I think there is a responsibility here that needs to be placed across the board. I'm so happy to have folks. There are elected leaders who are championing for these issues across the board, and I want to salute them. And I don't want this to be a political thing, but I want to salute them because there is a lot of times, particularly in presidential years, where you have all these candidates running to be the top of the ticket, that people overlook people. But the most reliable folks, the most reliable and the most vulnerable folks out there are seniors, and we have to do a better job of making sure that their issues are a part of our everyday conversation.
You are right about that. And just because I have to mention this, because you were there with me in the hospital as a person who has a prescription drug that I will have to carry with me for the rest of my life, an not an insulin pen, excuse me, an EpiPen. That cost is just skyrocketed again. And knowing that there's so many people like myself and seniors who depend on these drugs
life-saving drugs.
And you know for a fact I almost died.
Yeah.
So you can attest to that. You can tell people.
I definitely can attest to the fact that you were in the emergency room with your Chanel on and your headband.
I was speaking to the dying, but okay.
Yeah, but also the dying part about that. I think the cost of life-saving drugs is criminal.
Yeah.
I think if you can go across the border to Canada and you can get the same medicine for free, why can't you do that right here in the United States? Particularly for life-saving medication. That, to me, is mind-boggling, how we have become a nation where we care about profit margins than the health and well-being of our people. And I think that to me is why you saw such an uproar in 2018, because people got tired of rhetoric and they got tired of being becoming victims and slaves to a government, for real, that doesn't have their best interests at heart. And I think you're going to see more and more of that as time progresses.
Well, I know I personally thank you for that work, because again, as a person that has to deal with this myself for the rest of my life, and knowing that there's a monopoly going on, and if there's any other type of monopoly, like in the electric companies or in cable companies, the government tries to break it up. But yet when it comes to prescription drugs, it's the only monopoly that we're not trying to do anything about governmentally, right? So I'm very thankful for the work that you are doing and speaking about it, because it doesn't just impact seniors, and we know we love our seniors and they do not get the respect that they have definitely are owed. But there are so many babies that are needing insulin that can't get it and are dying from it. And so just to hear these points is so great, and we thank you so much for bringing these up. I also want to ask you one last question, and I think you know what it is.
What is it, girl?
Are you going to go for it? Okay.
I mean, what is my favorite rosé? Is that gonna be my question?
Yes, of course.
Well, I like anything that's pretty and sparkles.
Yes.
But nothing beats a good bubbly. I'm a big Chandon fan.
Yeah. Shout out Chandon. If you'd like to sponsor, please feel free.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, smooth richness, nice consistent bubbles, keep your fizz a little long. I'm all in for that. So.
Well, one thing I noticed about Waikinya when she drinks a nice glass of champagne / rosé, she always adds a nice little accoutrement to it. Nice berry of fruit, strawberry or something. Why do you do that? I always I love to see it in your cup, but I know there's another reason.
Well, it depends on the brand, right? I'm just gonna be honest. It depends on wine quality. Like some things you may need to add a little something to give it a different flavor or feel, but sometimes you don't. If you have a really good glass of champagne, you don't need to add anything, just your lips. But if you have something, if you have something that's a little bit challenged, if you're generally getting a happy hour wine or prosecco or a cava or something of that nature, I'm a black cherry fan, so I always like to add that. If I don't have that, I'll go for a nice blackberry.
Yes, blackberry molasses. That's a whole Mississippi, je ne sais quoi you guys have.
Yeah, but it also gives it a different color. So I generally do not like maraschino cherries in my champagne. I just do not like them.
Let's be clear about that, people.
That's just a red one that they put in all the little rum drinks and such. I don't want that. Like that, to me, is too much sugar. But if you can get a nice bourbon cherry or a nice dark cherry, like soaked in bourbon and added to your generally Prosecco, because most champagne, if you're gonna buy a nice glass champagne,
you don't want to.
You don't need to add that to it. But if you got like a Prosecco, like a nice happy hour wine or whatever, you can add that to it, and it gives it a different flair and flavor.
Well, it sounds like we need to have you back on for our cocktails episode.
I'm always here for a good cocktail. You know, I'm a Jack and Daniels girl, I'm a whiskey girl, so that's my thing. But I also love a great glass of champagne, and more specifically rosé. So.
Yay! I know, and we've broken many bottles of together.
Several bottles of rosé together. That is correct.
Well, where can people find you, Waikinya? Because I know people love you. So how can they contact you?
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for that. So I am the most visible I am on is Instagram and Twitter, and the handles for both are easy. It's WJS Clanton, so that's CLANTON, and that's across the board. Yeah, I do most of my communicating, social communicating on Twitter and Instagram, and then if it's for professional reasons only, contact me on LinkedIn. You can just search my whole name, Waikinya Clanton, and that's WAIKINYA. Last name Clanton, CLANTON, and that's it. That's where you can find me.
Yay! Yeah. Well, thank you, Waikinya. We thank you so much for coming today, and we want to continue toasting with you soon.
Yes. Cheers.
Cheers.
Yes.
Thanks, Waikinya, for a great conversation and some rosé. Next up is Kevin Rapp, an importer and distributor of wine here in Washington, D.C. We have a conversation about all the tax tariffs that the wine industry is facing. Take a listen.
How you got into the wine industry, if you want to talk about, like, what was the moment you're like, I love wine so much, I've got to get into it.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't necessarily, I think, an aha moment of I love wine so much. It was a kind of a career progression. You know, I graduated college with a degree in advertising and, marketing and communications, minor in political science. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to work with people and be out and about. So I had really enjoyed catering in college. So I actually called up all the catering companies nearby where I lived in Kensington, Maryland, right outside of D.C., and started working for a catering company, basically doing everything for them, working from the kitchen to doing early morning deliveries and organizing weddings and bartending at the weddings and basically everything. And, I enjoyed it. And then the truck blew up and burned our warehouse down, and I had to find another job.
Didn't see that turn.
Yeah, so I bounced around to different jobs, and I had a bunch of friends. So I worked in political fundraising. I worked for a company that was like a screen print and embroidery company. And, I really picked up a lot of knowledge jobs, but none of them really spoke to me. So I had a bunch of friends who were involved in distribution, and I saw that they were happy and they enjoyed what they were doing. So I called up some contacts. Unfortunately, friend's father from growing up was able to connect me to a distribution company, and I started working in off-premise sales, which for people listening that don't know the terminology,
the lingo
for the lingo for distributors, off-premise is essentially your retail wine shops and liquor stores and grocery stores, and then on-premise is your restaurants. And I was a off-premise guy for a large distribution company for close to 5 years. And then I got married, and my lovely wife, Nicole, pushed me in a good way to start my own thing. So we got married on gosh, I can't even remember now. I guess it was either a Friday or a Saturday. I think it was an odd day for a wedding, so I think it was a Friday. And that Sunday, we were off to Italy, and it was our first work trip together. So we we were off to Italy. We rented a car in Rome, threw all of our luggage in there, a little teeny European car, and we drove 3 hours east to the opposite coast to Abruzzo, where we met with producer Cantina Galasso, who I had met on LinkedIn at 4 a.m. one morning when the idea for my own company blossomed in my brain, because I had this one message from a producer who said they were looking for distribution, and I thought to myself, well, maybe I can be that guy. Maybe I can be the importer. So that's how it started, and then we spent 2 weeks driving all over Italy, and that's how we found our first 3 partners, one in Abruzzo, one in Puglia, which is about 5 hours south of Abruzzo, and then one out of Sicily, which is, all the way across to the west, and actually an island that's not even connected to the mainland of Italy.
Yeah, Sicily, I've heard, has some amazing wines and gets underrated about it. So it's good to know you have some good ideas to bringing more Sicilian wine, not just Italian wine, to the States. That's awesome.
Well, people around the world have been drinking these wines for a long time without knowing it. So when there was a phylloxera epidemic, which essentially phylloxera was a pest that attacked the native European vines, and in order while the vines in France a lot of them were down and they needed extra grapes, the Sicilians had a lot of vines that hadn't been affected by the phylloxera yet, and a lot of those grapes went over to France, from what I hear. And the same thing can be said for wines from Puglia, were sent up north to kind of bulk up the wines there. But people have been very quiet about that for a long time. So I don't know if it's necessarily in the history books yet, but I'm pretty certain.
But it will be. Yeah, no, I think it will be. Considering, history, the truth is now being told in so many ways.
Right.
And then speaking of which, history books, I know that the industry is seeing a lot of things historically happening. And I know you are working on the tariffs that are happening to the industry. Do you want to talk more about what's happening and what people can do? And how it impacts them. Let's talk about how it impacts my wine drinking.
Right. Well, first, I'll kind of lead off with what we're doing, and then I can backtrack a little bit from there. But the biggest thing that's on my mind right now is an event that we're hosting, and it's called the One America March. You can find information at oneamericamarch.com. And essentially the thought that I had was, our country is in this interesting time where we seem to be divided into 2 Americas, and there doesn't really seem to be any question about that from anybody that I talk to that's anywhere in America. There's a big divide, and that's sad. It's terrible. And what's happening with these tariffs, they are essentially, whether or not people understand them is a question that, we're trying to combat. They really affect and will hurt everybody. People think they're just about wine, but if you go to our website, oneamericamarch.com, I've basically taken the language that the U.S. trade representative who's deciding on these tariffs had put in their documentation, and I took out all of the extra language, and I just left the products. So what's happening is there's a dispute between 2 giant airline manufacturers. One is called Airbus, and they're based in the EU, the European Union, and one is called Boeing. It's based in the United States. And both of them, Boeing hasn't had their court case brought up yet, but the consensus opinion is that both of them have received subsidies from their governments in some way that has contributed to them having an unfair trade balance over their competitor. Now, that's a lot to listen to, and I'm sorry, it's just kind of complicated.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is there's these two giant airline manufacturers who maybe have wronged each other, and in order to rectify that, in order to right that situation, the U.S. government has decided that they are going to put some taxes on things like yogurt, milk, cream, butter, cheddar cheese, pear juice, biscuits, waffles, wine, whiskey, waistcoats, suits, swimwear, blankets, octopus, ceramic tiles, things that really have a lot, or actually, wait a second, not a lot to do with airplanes and airplanes being manufactured.
Totally not related to manufacturing a plane. They may be on a plane, but yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of like it's almost like the restaurant tariffs. And just to make it super simple to understand, so let's take wine. Everybody's talking about wine. This is a wine podcast. As an importer, if I'm bringing in a bottle of wine, and say that bottle of wine costs $1, when that bottle of wine arrives in port, now this tariff could be up to 100%. And there's no tricky terminology here. 100% means 100%, which is a tax that when I bring in that wine at $1 from my producer, the American government says, give me another $1. If I bring in a wine that costs $5,000, the American government says, give me another $5,000. And for a person like me, I started my business. I had my first shipment I received in December of 2016. I'm just getting my feet under me. It's only my wife and I. We are the only ones who've invested in it. And if these tariffs hit even at 25%, my company, as I know it, I import solely from Italy right now. My company goes out of business unless I drastically find a way to shift. And shifting would be not to American wines, because American wines are already, for one, expensive. For two, any American wines that you're going to find at a price point that is going to be by the glass or suitable for like a $9.99 or under on a shelf, those are already owned by giant distribution networks. There's nothing left for the little guys, and we'll all go out of business if we don't start bringing in wines from places like South America, Argentina, Chile, South Africa, Uruguay. I could go on forever. It's just a really it's a really terrible thing that's happening. It's terrible, and it's unwarranted. I have done nothing other than tried to build a business with my wife, and I could wake up tomorrow. The decision is going to be made anytime between now, it could be today, or anytime between now and February 15th. And one of those mornings I could wake up and sure, my business wouldn't be done at that moment because I have inventory right now, but I'd be looking at, 3 or 4 months from that day and thinking, man, I'm going to have to really get creative. And even then it's going to change my whole business. I import Italian wines. I don't import Chilean or Argentina wines, and other people already do that and already have market share. So I'd be starting from scratch. My 3 years would be thrown away. Other people would have 10, 25, 50 years or more just thrown down the garbage for a dispute between two giant airline manufacturers.
Wow. So how can people get involved? Like, how can we help the industry and people like you? Like, how do we help?
You mentioned you spread the word. I mean, you take a moment and you look at our website, oneamericamarch.com is a good first step. You see the products that are affected. for one, don't believe all the articles that you're reading. There was just a separate tariff on digital service tax that involved only French wines, and that there was an agreement that came about for that, and basically half of our wine industry thought that meant that the tariffs no longer existed. So it's confusing on many levels. But what you can do is you can join us at the march, which is going to be in Washington, D.C., at a place called Freedom Plaza, aptly named 1455 Pennsylvania Avenue Northwest. And that's going to be on Sunday, February 9th. We're going to begin meeting at 10 a.m. We're going to depart from Freedom Plaza at 11 a.m. en route to Lafayette Square, which is right outside the White House. And we're not going to stay too long, but we have about 250 signs that we're making, and I'm guesstimating at a minimum we'll have about 1,000 people. I'm really, really hoping we'll have more. And afterwards, we're gonna move over to the Hamilton, who has been they're great. They're part of the Clyde's Restaurant Group, and they have a wonderful venue right there on F Street. The actual address is 600 14th Street Northwest, but it's only about a 5-minute walk from the White House. And they have opened up their doors to us to have a little reception afterwards for anybody that is participating in the march. And for that, I'm still working out details, but I talked to the California Wine Institute, who many people think would be all for these tariffs, but actually they've been very open about being opposed, and they were even thinking of supplying wine for the event, just out of the kindness of their hearts and because they're concerned about what's going on. And it'll be a meetup for people not just in the wine industry, but for people who are interested in learning about how this is going to affect them, because the kind of what's going to happen is you have your importers who are affected, and you have your distributors who are affected, and then you have your retail and restaurants who are affected, and then you have your American consumers who are affected. So that, going back to that $1 bottle of wine, so right now without tariffs, if you have a $1 bottle of wine, 85 cents of that is staying in the American economy. This is not hurting the European Union. It's not going to make them want to bow down and stop giving subsidies to Airbus. It's not as big of a threat as it looks like it on paper. You can't judge a book by the cover. You got to open it up and read everything that's inside, and that's kind of what's happening here with these tariffs, or people are just kind of taking a peek at the headline, and then they're not digging into the actual body of what's going on in the context.
Yeah. Well, I know I will definitely be there, and we're going to put this information out for people. So this podcast is airing on Wednesday, February 5th.
Perfect.
And so there is perfect time for everyone to still get involved. So we have about 30 seconds left. Want to know what's your favorite rosé? What's your favorite rosé?
Well, you did give me you gave me like a slow pitch on this one, because you lobbed it up to me before we got on the phone, so it was nice. So there's a couple of them, but I got 30 seconds, so I'm going to go quick. One is called Provence Origami Rosé. It's with a producer out of Provence, obviously. It is a blend of Grenache, Syrah, Cinsault, and Roll. And they're one of my first producers that I worked with and brought in some wines from France. Second is from my producer Cantina Albea out of Puglia. It is a Primitivo rosé, which Primitivo is genetically identical to Zinfandel, which originally came from Croatia. It was named Trebedrag. So it's essentially a white Zinfandel, but it doesn't have all that negative connotation that has come because of box wine and things like that. And then thirdly, I have a producer out of South Africa that I am going to be, they're called Dunstone, and we are looking at bringing in a Shiraz rosé from them here in the next 2 months or 2 to 3 months, March or April. Hopefully the container will arrive with those wines.
Well, that's amazing, and we clearly have to have you back on because we didn't even really touch the surface of rosé. So we have to have you back.
I do need to learn more about rosé because the world of rosé is so vast, and I think you have a great podcast, Renee, because rosé itself has grown so much, and I think people get caught up just thinking about rosés from France or Provence-style rosé, and really there are producers all over the world that are making wonderful rosés, and I think the public in general is about to really have their eyes open to some super cool wines over the next few years as importers start bringing them in more and more.
Yeah. And so where can people find you on social media? And how can they, connect with you about purchasing wine or learning more from you?
Well, I'll tell you, I could give you my cell phone number because nobody calls it anyways. But if you want to call me, it's 202-999-8182. You'll also find that on my website, www.rappwine.com. That's RAPP, P.S. and Peter, WINE.com. You can find me on Facebook under my name, Kevin Rapp. You can find me on Instagram at DC_Rapp. You can find me on LinkedIn under Kevin Rapp. I'm trying to do a little bit of a social media push because as a little teeny tiny importer and distributor with big dreams, I need to get out there in the world, and what better time than 2020 to do that, right?
That's exactly right. This is the year of accomplishing all your goals. So we're going to make sure, as everyone who's listening to this podcast is going to go follow you, so people get your wine from Kevin, listen to Kevin, ask him questions about what's a good wine, and also help advocate for these tariff situations that really have nothing to do with the wine distributors and importers. It's all with these airplane manufacturers, and they need to stay in their business and let the wine distributors and importers do theirs.
Right. And just call me. I'm here. Call me.
Yeah, we'll do it. Everybody, please call him. Well, thank you so much, Kevin. We really appreciate your time today. And, of course, you'll be on another episode soon.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Renee. I appreciate it. Best of luck to you.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye.
Wow, what a day. So much rosé has been sipped. Thanks, Yes Way Rosé, bartender Ben, for pouring it up. It was an interesting bottle that we just completed this episode, but nonetheless, maybe next week we'll have a different version of a great wine as well. Hopefully the bartender is able to find a delicious rosé that's not so awkward. We want to thank our guests, Waikinya Clanton, Democratic strategist, Kevin Rapp, importer and distributor of wines here in Washington, D.C., and all of you for listening to our very first episode. Without you guys listening in, this thing would not be a thing. And if you have any questions or you want to actually get on the show or recommend someone, hit us up at Renee@theroseapodcast.com. That's RENEE at therosehourpodcast.com. Also, follow us on social media. Just go ahead and type in the Rosé Hour Podcast. We'll be there on all social media platforms. And we're also on Spotify. We're on iTunes. So if you're listening to us on one medium, check us out somewhere else. Tell a friend, tell a neighbor, tell everybody. Until next time, sip, sip, hooray, friends.
Rosé.
So we sipping rosé.
We gonna sip rosé. Rosé.
Sipping rosé.
Baby girl, she don't play. Don't play.
So we sipping rosé.
We're gonna sip rosé.
That rosé hour, baby. Sipping rosé.
Everything will be okay. Okay.
And we sipping rosé.
We gonna sip rosé. Rosé.
And we sipping rosé.
Everything will be okay. Okay.
Cause we sipping rosé.
We gonna sip rosé.
All the ladies,
Rosé.
all the ladies rosé.
Da 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 da.
rose. Chi-town, get up, we sippin' rose.
We gonna sip rosé.
DC, LA,
Girl, she